lot of breaking news at the top of the hour here on NBC News Now, and we are kicking it off with President Trump's new threats to change how the U.S. responds to disasters. We expect the president to arrive in California at this hour, slamming FEMA during his visit to hurricane-ravaged North Carolina earlier today. So can he really get rid of FEMA? We are going to break all of that down. Also tonight, cities on edge like Newark, New Jersey, where we have video showing an overnight immigration raid, and confusion in Chicago about whether ICE agents did or didn't try to enter a school there. Plus, another major retail store says it will end its diversity efforts, while Target says DEI initiatives are not a priority any longer. And then the new details we're just now getting about a burglary at the home of an Atlanta Falcons player just days after the arrest of 4 Chilean nationals allegedly connected to a break-in at another player's home. But we're now learning about both cases. And sticking with sports, the Australian Open's attitude adjustment, with fans giving big boos, and no, we're not talking alcohol, boos to a big star. Why? We'll tell you and show you later in the newscast. Good day, I'm Tom Costello in for Hallie. It is a very busy Friday, and soon we expect to see President Trump on the ground in Los Angeles, touring wildfire damage as he vows to completely upend how the federal government responds to future disasters. The California visit is part of his first trip out of Washington since taking office on Monday. And that's notable given how he's used blue California as a foil for his vision of the country, particularly with the governor there, Gavin Newsom, who, as you know, the two have really traded barbs over the handling of what will be the most expensive wildfire in the state's history. But who will bear that cost? That's the big question, because the president is making it very clear. He puts the blame squarely on FEMA, the federal agency that's responsible for putting boots on the ground and distributing money after disasters. But now the president, during a visit to North Carolina with the terribly damaged area there from Hurricane Hallie, he says he wants to sign an executive order that could get rid of the agency altogether. Take a listen.
FEMA just hasn't done the job. I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away, and we pay directly. We pay a percentage to the state.
We'll begin the work of fundamentally changing, terminating, or overhauling FEMA. FEMA's been a disaster, no matter where they are.
Okay, we have some big questions about that because Mr. Trump says the emergency aid could still, quote, go through us. What does that mean? And would that put the burden on states, which really don't have nearly the same budgets and manpower as the federal government? NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is joining me now. He's on the story. And Vaughn, we're just learning in the last 10 minutes that, in fact, the president says he wants to create a task force to review FEMA. So why has FEMA been such a big target for this president?
Right. This goes back to the aftermath of Hurricane Hallie in North Carolina. During his own presidential campaign, there were individuals who were not getting resources in a timely manner. But there's part of that in which during any disaster, hurricane, wildfire, tornado, these circumstances in these communities that are hit, they're devastating, and water supplies and electricity resources become minimal. And FEMA stepped in at the request of North Carolina officials and worked in cooperation logistically with them. Yet Donald Trump, then the candidate, was criticizing FEMA's response as not having done enough in real time. And that is where today you saw him now here in the last few minutes looking at creating a FEMA task force on how to restructure the agency under the Department of Homeland Security. But also at one point earlier today, while in North Carolina, suggesting that perhaps FEMA should be done away with altogether and resources instead go directly to the states. Take a listen.
I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it. To have a group of people come in from an area that don't even know where they're going in order to solve immediately a problem is something that never worked for me.
Now, one key part of this here is that states are the ones that do, at this moment, lead the disaster relief and response efforts. And when you look where FEMA steps in, it's oftentimes in terms of, as you said, manpower, personnel, and equipment. And that is really where they help the states most often during these tragedies.
You know, it's such a critical point, Vaughn, because you and I have both been in disaster zones. FEMA is really about coordinating all the influx of teams that come in to help, right? I mean, if you've got this disaster in North Carolina and Maryland teams come in to help, FEMA is kind of the coordinating body. But listen, we'll talk more about that when the president arrives in California. Can we bring up another topic that's catching our interest today? Because the president is pulling the government-funded security for Dr. Anthony Fauci, the former chief of the NIH, who led the COVID-19 response in his first term and became a big target for conservatives, and the backlash has been just unrelenting. Dr. Fauci has left government, but he's had security because of that threat. So typically, when do security details like this end?
Typically, Anthony Fauci, who was served during the Biden administration and during the Trump administration and for decades in the federal government before that, would not typically need security. Yet what we saw during the pandemic and the aftermath was, on particularly the right, an attack on Anthony Fauci for what people that have contended was Anthony Fauci being responsible for urging President Trump at the time to shut down schools and other places and mask up. And he has had threats against his life, and he has had a security detail ever since because of those threats. He's 84 years old now, and it was just in the last 24 hours that his security detail has been removed by the Trump administration. And we saw that with John Bolton, the former national security advisor, who has become a chief critic to Donald Trump. But we've also saw it with Mike Pompeo, his former Secretary of State, just yesterday losing his security detail despite having threats on his own life by Iran. So this is just 5 days into this administration, noteworthy decisions being made by the now president against individuals who he used to be so closely aligned with and relied on during his administration.
Well, I do know Dr. Fauci's neighbors keep a close eye on him and his home, so hopefully they'll keep their eyes peeled. Vaughn, thank you very much, Vaughn Hilliard. Some breaking news just into us now. At least 2 more ICE raids taking place in Newark, New Jersey, as the White House appears to be moving quickly to expel hundreds of migrants from the country. And we have surveillance video obtained by WNBC in New York showing an overnight raid at a fish market in Newark. ICE has launched raids in cities nationwide, according to a Trump administration official. It comes as senior career Department of Justice chiefs are being reassigned to target sanctuary cities, that according to a source with knowledge. There was also a strange situation in Chicago where school district leaders say ICE agents showed up at one of its elementary schools.
We will not coordinate with immigration and custom enforcement agents. We will not allow ICE agents access to CPS facilities unless they produce a criminal judicial warrant signed by a federal judge.
CPS is Chicago Public Schools, but ICE says that an encounter did not happen. We're waiting to learn more about the actual circumstances. Meanwhile, at least 2 deportation flights to Guatemala have already taken off. That, according to 3 DOD officials and a source familiar with that situation. To be clear now, these arrests are not abnormal, but they do appear to be ramping up now. The White House says nearly 540 arrests were made on Thursday alone. That's more than double the number of arrests made during the entire month of September. Let's go now to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, who's actually in Newark. And Gabe, talk about these raids where you are. What more can you tell us about the cities the Trump administration is targeting and why they're targeting these cities?
Well, Tom, good afternoon. Look, city officials call them raids. ICE, however, calls them targeted enforcement operations. Now, I'm standing in front of a restaurant here, and this is where the operation happened yesterday. City officials say that 3 undocumented immigrants were arrested. Now, this restaurant employs about 80 to 90 people on any given day. The mayor says he doesn't know exactly why he was targeted, but they do say, city officials say, that there is a sense of fear in this community now. Now, you mentioned, Tom, some of those numbers as well. The Trump administration is targeting many cities across the country. We had been reporting for a while that there were discussions about plans for roundups in many major cities, everything from Chicago to Philadelphia to New York to Los Angeles to Denver. This is part of what President Trump promised during his campaign, and now it appears he's making good on that promise, at least so far, Tom.
Okay, Gabe Gutierrez watching it from Newark. Thank you very much. Back here in Washington, we expect a vote tonight on President Trump's choice to lead the world's most expensive military. His Pentagon pick, Pete Hegseth, is his nomination anyway, going before a full Senate vote as 2 Republicans are still saying no. The majority's most moderate members, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. But 2 no votes cannot block this nomination. 4 is the deciding number. And with hours to go, it's unlikely 4 votes will go against him. Just a reminder, Hegseth has faced a barrage of questions about his experience for the job as a former Fox News host, plus allegations of sexual assault and alcohol abuse. Hegseth denies all of the allegations. NBC's Julie Sirkin on Capitol Hill, where the action is tonight. Julie, we know Senators Murkowski and Collins are a no vote, but realistically, are there others out there who are uncommitted who are no, or does this look like it's going to sail through?
Definitely doesn't look like it's going to sail through, Tom, at all. In fact, there are still at least 2 Senate Republicans, Mitch McConnell and Tom Tillis, perhaps even others, that could potentially surprise everyone and change their no vote that they've been issuing all week on those procedural votes, yes vote to a no vote tonight, and join Democrats and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski in tanking Pete Hegseth. But to be clear, though, there is no indication that that is definitely going to happen. Some of my sources have gone dark in the last half an hour. That is always something that causes me to sort of perk up and listen very closely to the tea leaves here. But we are still at this point tracking a vote in the next couple of hours on Pete Hegseth. We did catch up today, by the way, with Susan Collins, who had this to say. Watch.
Oh, there already is. There already is. And I'm sure there will be more. But I have to do what I think is right. And in this case, I believe I made the right decision.
And she's talking about there the threats and intimidation that she's been getting since revealing yesterday that she's going to vote against Pete Hegseth and cross President Trump here.
To be clear, Susan Collins is saying there already is, or she's receiving threats. Is that what she's saying? That she had better follow the president's line?
Well, she's saying there's, of course, pressure and intimidation, but she's doing what she can here. She's doing the right thing here, Tom, in her words, and it is voting against Pete Hegseth, somebody that she said is unqualified for the job, doesn't have the temperament for the job, and somebody that she's concerned with, given all of those allegations that other senators are also concerned with. This is perhaps going to be the first time where the vice president has to break a tie if just one Senate Republican joins Collins and Murkowski since 2017. So it would be pretty historic either way. I can't see that happening, though. I think if we're going to have more Senate Republicans come out and say no to Pete Hegseth, it is going to be enough to kill his nomination and not leave any room for J.D. Vance to then break a tie and then them cross Trump for no reason.
Julie, your breaking news for us here. Thank you for that. And from Senator Collins, interesting information. We have more breaking news. Target announcing it is rolling back diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at the company. In a memo to employees, the Minneapolis-based company says it will end its 3-year DEI goals, stop reports to external diversity-focused groups, and end a program focused on carrying more products from Black or minority-owned businesses. The decision follows President Trump's executive orders almost immediately after his inauguration to end the government's DEI programs. NBC's Brian Chung joining us now with that. Brian, this is a pretty significant change of direction for Target, right? Walk us through the company's history with DEI and suddenly a turnaround?
Yeah, Tom, as you outlined there, Target rolling back a number of their DEI policies in an announcement today. And in a memo that a chief executive officer in the high ranks of Target sending to employees today, they described the reason for making these DEI changes as, quote, the result of the evolving external landscape. And you can imagine what that external landscape entails. It is, of course, the new president wanting to roll back DEI within the federal government and a lot of these mounting challenges against other companies that we've seen in the last few months with regards to their DEI policies. But I want to point out, this is a pretty remarkable turn for a company, Target, that is based in Minneapolis. As you recall, that is the city where George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And Target, at the time, was one of the first companies to really go out and in a full-throated manner defend their efforts to try to boost DEI policies. At the time, CEO Brian Cornell saying, quote, that could have been one of my Target team members. And then now here you have this announcement today, Tom, that they're rolling back those policies. It really does speak to the environment that we're in today.
Can you drill down on that? Because we have seen several companies kind of reversing course here, right? Are they reading the tea leaves for the culture nationwide, the pop culture or Main Street USA, or are they responding to pressure from President Trump?
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily directly a function of President Trump. You could argue that a lot of these pressures have actually been coming from the corporate sector and a lot of kind of activist groups, even in the months leading up to the election. But when you look at names like Harley Davidson, names like Walmart, names like McDonald's, these are companies that have pared back their DEI policies. But I want to point out it's not the case at every company. Just yesterday, Costco had a shareholder vote where they voted down a proposal to pare back their policies. And Tom, that vote was 98% against changing and rolling back their policies. So very much an open battleground in the DEI space, at least in corporate America.
Yeah, I saw that Costco vote. That's really striking compared to the others out there that are reversing course. Brian Chung on the story as always. Brian, thanks, buddy. We have more breaking news on this busy Friday as we learn that Atlanta Falcons player Antonio Hamilton Sr.'s home in Georgia was burglarized overnight. That, according to the police report, Hamilton was on vacation and saw 3 men enter the house through his Ring camera. Hamilton says the suspects took a safe from his home. They have not yet been caught. Now, you'll recall just this week, 4 men were arrested in connection with the burglary at the home of Cincinnati Bengals star quarterback Joe Burrow last month. We go now to NBC's Sam Brock on the story. Sam, where does this investigation stand right now?
Sure, Tom. Good evening. Good to be with you. Certainly, it's impossible not to see this through the prism of what's happened to a lot of high-profile athletes in recent months. And you might be thinking, here we go again. There's no clear connection here between what happened to Joe Burrow or any of the other professional athletes yet. But let's talk about what happened to Antonio Hamilton. This was a suburb of Atlanta. He says, Hamilton, that on his Ring camera around midnight earlier this week, he saw 3 men breaking into his home. By the time police actually arrived, Tom, they had left through the back, and police said that they were not able to track his set. It appears they were able to get out through the woods and they get into a vehicle, but they did find that safe that you mentioned by the end of the yard, inside of it, containing multiple firearms, according to the police report, and also multiple expensive handbags. That's what we know right now with respect to him. The investigation is ongoing. But some of the biggest names in all of sports have been burglarized, and there have been warnings from the FBI about South American theft gangs, or SATGs, potentially being behind some of these burglaries.
Well, listen, this wasn't done during the season, but it does kind of fit this pattern of burglaries that you've been talking about, that we've been reporting on, with sports stars being the biggest victims, right? So the fact that he was out of town, out of his house, but wasn't playing in a big game, what does that mean? That they were stalking him? That they were somehow watching his home?
Yeah. I think this is a really good point, actually, Tom. The fact that you're talking about athletes where their schedules are public, right? Yeah. Criminals would know when they are and are not home. In this case, Hamilton actually was on a vacation. But the reality is a lot of these have happened under the same circumstances. You're seeing a list right now of all of the high-profile athletes that had been burglarized in recent months. Luka Doncic, Joe Burrow, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes. Those are some of the biggest names in their respective sports. With respect to Joe Burrow, there were recently 4 men who were arrested, Chilean nationals, that according to law enforcement, they had fake IDs on them. They had like 7 cell phones, Tom, and they also had LSU and Cincinnati Bengals paraphernalia as well, which is why potentially there could be a link to Burrow there, that we have not heard that definitively from police. But the reality is, in these memos that the NBA has sent to teams and that the NFL has sent to teams incorporating information from the FBI, they say there are these South American gangs that are using sophisticated techniques. They're doing surveillance ahead of time by posing as like Uber delivery drivers or landscapers and understanding the vulnerability in certain neighborhoods, and then going in with relatively unsophisticated tools, breaking into these homes and stealing valuable items. So basically, NFL players, NHL players, NBA players have all been put on warning. Don't flash what you have on social media. Be careful, and maybe not just surveillance, but also actual physical security at your home might be necessary.
And ask the neighbors to keep a watch out as well. Sam Brock, thanks very much, Sam.
You got it.
Other news now overseas. Hamas says it is set to release 4 female Israeli soldiers tomorrow as part of the ceasefire and hostage release deal with Israel. The women are all alive. They will be transferred to an Israeli custody in exchange for 200 Palestinian prisoners. If successful, it will be the second such exchange as part of the ceasefire deal. But the ceasefire in Gaza does not mean a full ceasefire in the region, with Israeli forces conducting operations in the West Bank. NBC's Danielle Hamajian has more.
First came the ceasefire in southern Lebanon, then Gaza, but now Israel is shifting its focus and its fire to the West Bank. The city of Jenin is used to Israeli military raids, but this one is on a different, bigger scale. Operation Iron Wall began earlier this week. This is Israel's attempt to root out terrorism once and for all. But neighboring countries fear a major escalation.
And what's happening in the West Bank should not be allowed to lead to what has happened in Gaza.
The Israeli defense minister saying they're applying lessons they learned in Gaza. The West Bank city of Jenin has often been called Little Gaza. Home to both Hamas and Islamic Jihad, it's seen by many Palestinians as ground zero for the armed resistance against the Israeli military occupation. The human rights groups say Israeli forces have fired on civilians. It all coincided with the beginning of the ceasefire. Sunday night, while 3 hostages were returned to Israel, Palestinian families in the West Bank waited for 90 women and teenagers to be released from Israeli prisons as part of the deal. Mohammed Amro sat waiting for his 23-year-old daughter.
Jenin is a part of my heart. I miss her very, very, very much.
13 months and 20 days later, they were reunited with a warning by Israeli authorities. Do not celebrate your release. That didn't stop them. She received a hero's welcome upon her return in her village of Dura. A few days later, we went to see her at home. Jenin was an agricultural engineering student before her arrest. She told us she had never even attended a protest.
Israel considers you a terrorist.
How am I a terrorist, she asks. I was a university student and lived with my family. What acts of terrorism have I committed? It's a question NBC News put to Israeli authorities, but received no answer. Her lawyer tells NBC News her detention was repeatedly extended without evidence against her. It's a controversial Israeli policy known as administrative detention, where detainees are held indefinitely without being charged or tried. But among those who are charged are minors, and the main accusations against them.
The most common charges are expressions on social media or elsewhere, and participation in demonstrations, whether it involves throwing stones or doesn't.
And the maximum sentence for stone throwing, 20 years. The day after her release, the IDF came to Jenin's house to warn her to keep a low profile. Asked why she agreed to speak to the media knowing she's being watched. Jenin says it's her right to speak up. She also tells us she wants the world to know they didn't break her spirit. Her family, along with many Palestinians, now question what will happen to the West Bank under President Trump, a staunch supporter of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing government.
Many say he helped end the war in Gaza. Do you fear that he's going to let Netanyahu do whatever he wants in the West Bank?
I personally can't understand this man, Trump. I hope that the world, the people, the nations, that all stay with us to get our rights.
Now, in exchange for those 4 female hostages, Israel will release 200 prisoners, among them 120 serving life sentences. They're not going to be released into the West Bank. Instead, they'll be deported to a third country. There will be eventually more high-profile Palestinian prisoners, among them Palestinian leaders, who are expected to be released in the second stage, if we ever get there. Tom.
Okay, great reporting. NBC's Danielle Hamajian, thank you very much. Still to come from us, lawyers for the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students back in court, trying to toss out some DNA evidence from the case. Why the judge doesn't seem convinced. Plus, opening statements in rap superstar A$AP Rocky's assault trial. The heated fight between childhood friends caught on camera. That's coming up after the break. Coming up, the newly released audio of Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter impersonating the baseball superstar in a phone call to a bank. He wanted money? That'll be interesting. But first, tonight, A$AP Rocky's lawyer, in just the last few minutes, tells a jury in Los Angeles that the hip-hop superstar's assault trial is about jealousy, lies, and greed caused by Rocky's former childhood friend. Take a listen to that.
The evidence will show you it's nothing more than a money grab, nothing more. clear intent and extortion by Relly so he can keep funding this extravagant lifestyle of his.
All right, let's break that down. You see ASAP, also known as Rakeem Mayers, arriving at court as day one of the trial got underway. ASAP Relly, once a close friend of ASAP Rocky's, says the two started arguing in a parking garage near a Hollywood hotel when Rocky allegedly pulled out a gun and shot Relly, grazing his knuckles. The 36-year-old rapper is facing 2 felony counts of assault with a semi-automatic firearm. A guilty verdict could land him in prison for up to 24 years. Rocky is pleading not guilty. NBC's Adrian Broaddus is joining me now. Adrian, what's the case that the prosecution is making here? And can I ask you to summarize what we heard in that soundbite? Because honestly, I had a hard time understanding what he was saying.
You know what? There was a lot happening in court today, Tom. The defense attorney described what happened that day in November, his words, not mine, as a hot mess. And we've seen some of that play out in the court today, but I will do my best right now to sum this all up for you and our viewers. Prosecutors are arguing, in a nutshell, that ASAP Rocky ambushed his former friend, Terrell Efron, that day back in 2021, November 6th to be exact. It happened in California, right near a popular hotel there in Hollywood, just steps away from the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The two have been friends since childhood, about 19 years. And prosecutors did say in court today, over the last 2 years, well, the 2 years prior to this incident, there had been some drama between the two. And the victim in this case, Terrell, Rocky's friend, thought he was going to meet up with ASAP Rocky that day to hash out their beef. Here's more of what the prosecuting attorney had to say.
Keep in mind, these men have known each other for a long time. And Mr. Efron will tell you, in his state of mind, he never believed that he was going to be shot. He never believed that the defendant would actually shoot him.
And Tom, the opening statement started earlier today. This is live TV right now. I'm just going to fix my earpiece.
That's all right.
But opening statement started earlier today, and the defense is delivering its opening statement right now.
Anybody who's done live TV has had their earpiece fall out on them. I've had it happen to me. Listen, there was, if you can hear me, there was a delay earlier today in actually getting the trial started, right? Related to a ballistics report, I understand, with the shooting incident, and then things got heated.
Yeah, there were some fireworks before we even heard those opening statements, but the judge said, in his opinion, nothing nefarious had taken place. In a nutshell, late last night, there was a late discovery, and prosecutors presented some new evidence, as well as a new witness, which defense attorneys for ASAP Rocky did not want to have included, and they said that that would impact their opening statements, but the judge disagreed and said that this trial must move forward. And so, as I just mentioned, opening statements for the defense are happening right now. A big thing that the defense is saying, the gun used on this alleged day wasn't even a real gun. Take a listen.
You'll learn that was a prop gun, also called a starter gun, a blank gun, but it's a type of fake gun. It's used in pop movies and music videos. It's also used to scare off attackers by looking and sounding like a real gun without actually firing a live round.
So, Tom, it is hard to hear him, but he called it a prop gun, which is also known as a starter gun. He went on to say it's the same type of gun that was used in a music video produced by ASAP Rocky and Rihanna. Many of you know the two share children together, and it's a possibility we could see Rihanna in the courtroom at some point. She was not in the courtroom today, but if convicted, ASAP Rocky, this Grammy-nominated artist who is expected to host the Met Gala later this year, could face up to 24 years in prison if convicted, Tom.
That's the summary we all needed. Nicely done. Adrian, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's get you over now to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about this evening. Number 1, the teenager who shot and killed a student at a school in Tennessee earlier this week live streamed part of that incident. That, according to the platform he used, authorities say he was influenced by content described as harmful and objectionable. Remember, the 17-year-old gunman also hurt a second student before he died by suicide. Number 2, the defense team for murder suspect Bryan Kohberger trying to get evidence tossed out. You recall, he's accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. Kohberger's defense is challenging how investigators collected DNA and then used a public ancestry site. The judge seemed to be unpersuaded that the techniques violated Kohberger's rights. Number 3, a federal judge today essentially barring the Oath Keepers founder from entering D.C. without court permission. And as you know, Stuart Rhodes was sentenced to 18 years in prison for his role in the January 6th insurrection. He was then pardoned by President Trump. The order applies to several other Oath Keeper members as well. Number 4, new audio allegedly captured L.A. Dodgers star Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter Ispei Mizuhara impersonating the baseball player in a call with the bank. And listen closely, he's trying to take out a loan.
Who am I speaking with?
Shohei Ohtani.
Could you tell me the name of the payee and the amount of the transaction, please?
It's for $200,000.
What is the reason for this transaction?
For a car loan.
What is your relationship to the payee?
He's my friend.
So you may remember he has previously pleaded guilty to fraud charges for stealing almost $17 million from Ohtani. Mizuhara is set to be sentenced next month. His attorney did not respond to the AP's request for comment. Number 5, Billie Eilish, Shakira, and Sabrina Carpenter, all some of the folks set to perform at this year's Grammy Awards. They're also all nominated for the show on February 2nd, hosted by Trevor Noah. The Recording Academy says more performers will be announced in the coming days. Should be a good show. All right, we're going to take you now down under, where one of the world's premier tennis events is going through some, let's call it an attitude adjustment. Here's the moment that's getting the attention.
Very much in that tiebreak. Second, did he miss the volley to lose the set? He came forward to shake hands, and this is disappointing. The drive for 25 ends right here.
All right, you see the mix of emotions there, including some boos when the crowd learned the 24-time Grand Slam champion Novak Djokovic had to retire from the match because of a leg injury. Now, Djokovic has a long, testy relationship with Aussie fans. He had to skip the tournament back in 2022 because of his refusal to take the COVID vaccine, with a lot of controversy surrounding his visa. NBC's Kathy Park joins us now. Kathy, Djokovic is just the center of what's become this testy tournament. And I mean, this was once known as the Happy Open, right? Why is it not so happy anymore? It's kind of more like the Angry Open right now.
Yeah, Tom, that's a good way to put it. So fans really aren't holding back their emotions, and it's happening in a sport. This is tennis, where there's typically a little bit more civility, right? So we've seen fans calling out during or between points. You heard that there, the booing. And even players are becoming much more vocal this time around, criticizing the TV interviewers at the tournament. In fact, we heard it from American tennis star Ben Shelton. Once he reached the semifinals at a press conference, he said, quote, "I've been a little bit shocked this week with how players have been treated by the broadcasters. I noticed it with Lerner Tien in one of his matches. I think when he beat Medvedev, his post-match interview, I thought it was kind of embarrassing and disrespectful." So some choice words there. And you might be wondering, what is going on at the Australian Open? So there are a couple of theories out there. Some say fans are still kind of getting adjusted to this post-pandemic world after being cooped up. They're finally able to attend these sporting events in person, and they're kind of letting it all hang out. This could also be the byproduct of tennis leaders trying to attract new fans, even younger fans. And then lastly, it could just be coincidental and not necessarily a reflection of what's happening in the greater tennis world, Tom.
Yeah, but it does seem that it extends beyond athletics, doesn't it? It seems like all of us were a little less civilized than we were before the pandemic. Not an editorial, just saying. Kathy, thank you very much. Still ahead, how Europe's last dictator is expected to sweep elections this weekend in Belarus. Big surprise? Not really. That's coming up in our breakdown. And the wild video showing a bear attack in Pennsylvania, the rare viral bear disease that the state's game commission says the animal had. That's coming up. Okay, it's cold, it's January, you're looking around, everybody is sneezing and coughing and staying home from work, and you're thinking, this cold and flu season is getting worse by the day, right? Yeah, it is. New data from the CDC today shows influenza trends are growing or likely growing in at least 39 states. The CDC update comes despite the Trump administration's order for all federal health agencies to stop all external communications. It's a move some health officials say would make it hard to coordinate and identify emergency threats like bird flu. We want to bring in NBC News medical reporter Erica Edwards with more. Erica, walk us through here, right? The picture we're getting on how bad this influenza epidemic is. And I must say, I was surprised that we got the CDC data today. I didn't think we would.
You and me both, right? Remember, but I tell you, what we learned today was that we are now getting back up to about as how bad the flu season was before the holidays. Today, the CDC did release some data that flu cases are rising again across the country. As of January 18th, 25% of flu tests were coming back as positive, compared to less than 20% from the week before. What's more, the number of emergency room visits are also rising related to the flu. Young kids and older adults over age 65 make up the vast majority of ER visits and flu-related hospitalizations. Now, from what we can tell from the data we have so far, most cases are flu A strains, but flu B could also rise in the coming weeks. Remember, Tom, we still have about a month to go in this typical flu season. Tom?
Flu A is not as bad as flu B?
No expert will ever tell you that one strain is is worse than the other, because both strains are very unpredictable.
Can we talk about whatever is going on with the communications right now from the government, from the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, because the Trump administration had put a halt on all outgoing communications, and then we get this bit of data from the CDC. You and I both covered these agencies during COVID, during the pandemic, under the first Trump administration. And after a while, some of the information, people were suggesting, are the numbers being manipulated in some way? How are we supposed to read whether the data is going to be accurate?
Well, I could just tell you that we have to rely on the data that we're given. What's hard right now is that when we ask clarifying questions, follow-up questions to the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, as you mentioned, we're not getting those questions answered. So they're giving us little bits of data here and there. But again, we don't really have time for those follow-up questions to really address the concerns that you just brought up. So meanwhile, we have to really rely on other sources. Remember that most public health starts at local health departments, at state health departments, and they're really still the ones that have all that information. Experts are hoping this federal pause on national communications will be resolved within the next week.
Yeah, NBC News took to calling every single health department in every single state across the country to get accurate, down to the zip code data. Erica Edwards, one of the best in the biz. Erica, thank you very much. NBC News covers hundreds of stories each day, and it's awfully tough to read, to watch, or listen to them all. Our bureau teams have done it for you and also for me. So this is what they say is going down in their regions, and we call this segment The Local. From our Midwest bureau, take a look at this. An elementary school bus carrying dozens of kids overturned in Michigan. There were about 30 students on board. None of the students was injured. Apparently, the driver just lost control on a very icy road there in Michigan. Out of our Northeast Bureau, the Pennsylvania Game Commission says a black bear that attacked a man last week actually had rabies. Here's the video. The man is walking on a trail. The bear starts following him, biting him, scratching him. So the bear was shot and killed by a homeowner nearby. The man survived the attack and is expected to make a full recovery. From our Washington Bureau now, giant pandas made their big return debut at the National Zoo in D.C. today. Now, we've told you about 3-year-old Bao Li and Qing Bao before, part of panda diplomacy or pandaplomacy that began back in 1972. The 3-year-olds are on loan from China. They arrived in D.C. in October, but had to get their bearings, in their new home before the public was allowed to see them today. They'll be here at the zoo for the next decade. Tonight, people in Belarus are getting ready for a big election on Sunday. Now, some are even voting early. But will their vote count? A lot of experts are already calling this a sham election. They say that, and I'm quoting here, Europe's longest dictator is about to get another term, and he did not earn it. NBC's Yasmin Vasugian explains in tonight's breakdown.
Right now, early voting is happening in Belarus, where a crucial election will happen this weekend. The country, the European Parliament says, is now run by, quote, Europe's last dictator. We're talking about President Alexander Lukashenko. He's seeking his 7th term in office, expected to win again in a vote that many Western democracies are already calling illegitimate. Lukashenko says that the more he is stirred by these accusations, the more inclined he is to run and do what's necessary for Belarus. Lukashenko even moving the election up from the summer to now. Some political analysts saying this move is because cold weather will discourage mass protests and dissent of his election. How the world reacts to Sunday's election could set a new tone, especially with the new Trump administration as they look to end the war in Ukraine because of Belarus's close ties to Russia and Russian President Vladimir Putin. From the outside, Lukashenko's grip on power seems steady, but the streets tell a different story. The last election in 2020, massive protests and a violent response from the government. But it wasn't always like this. Lukashenko, first elected in 1994, 3 years after the Soviet Union collapsed. Then, his election, a symbol of a new era, despite maintaining close ties with Russia and Putin once he took power.
Russia and Belarus signed a treaty back in the late 90s that stipulated the creation of what they call the Union State. They're equal on paper.
Lukashenko, for his part, cracking down on journalists and censoring non-state-owned media and political opposition. In 2004, a referendum was passed to remove term limits, clearing the path for him to stay in power. A congressional report now estimating a few 100,000 people have fled the country since 2020, including the opposition leader from the 2020 election.
Russian people haven't given up in our fight for freedom, and despite all the repressions that are continuing for years already, people continue to fight.
Now the new face of the opposition movement behind bars, along with over 1,000 political prisoners, according to a U.S. congressional report. But in an unexpected move in the past couple of months, Lukashenko pardoned over 100 prisoners.
He's creating himself a maneuver space to be able to have some rapprochement with the West.
Lukashenko possibly looking for support from President Trump amidst the administration's approach on Ukraine and Lukashenko's ongoing support for Moscow. We've reached out to the White House for comment, but have not yet heard back. And this weekend's election critical to the country's future. Yasmin Vasugian, NBC News.
Yasmin actually joins us right now. And Yasmin, this may be impossible to know. How is Belarus feeling about the new president, the new Trump administration?
Well, I mean, I think, you kind of heard it there in the piece, Tom, whereas Lukashenko is essentially cracking down on journalists, on dissidents, on opposition as well. So many Belarusians feel as if they're living in a police state, not unlike folks that are living right now inside Russia as well. Of course, Belarus's main ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin, they were hoping, of course, between the war in Ukraine, that there was a possibility that with Western help, Ukraine could topple Russia, meaning topple Putin, and then subsequently topple Lukashenko. Instead now, with the dawn of the Trump administration looking to strike a deal and end the war, they're seeing likely Putin's power grow, which means, of course, Lukashenko's power will grow as well. And I just want to remind folks, as we saw images there as well, back in 2020, he declared winning that presidential election with 80% of the vote. The people inside Belarus, they said no way. They flooded the streets. The European Union as well, not accepting those results. And so certainly he is likely to win this weekend, but a lot of Belarusians inside that country not happy about it, Tom.
And it may be one reason why he hasn't put troops in Ukraine, right? I mean, he's afraid of backlash from his own military and his own people.
Right. Exactly right.
Yeah. Yasmin, thanks very much. Coming up from us, a rare glimpse into how North Korea's military thinks, what former troops of Kim Jong-un's army told our team in Korea. That's coming up after the break. We're back with our original now in-depth reporting on a topic we like to watch. South Korea's military today says it suspects North Korea is getting ready to send even more troops to Russia to fight Ukrainian forces after North Korean soldiers have already suffered heavy casualties in the fighting, in part because they lack modern combat training. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer spoke with former members of Kim Jong-un's army who have since defected to South Korea.
When 2 North Korean soldiers were captured alive, it was a victory of sorts for Ukraine. Videos released by Ukraine's military have shown the men being questioned with help from South Korean intelligence. One of them said he thought he was going for training, not a war, and that initially he didn't know who he was fighting. The North Koreans are providing a rare glimpse into Russian forces in Kursk, where U.S. officials say some 12,000 North Korean troops are taking heavy losses. But for Ukraine, the prisoners are also crucial evidence that could expose Kim Jong-un's role in an expanding war. Ri Sung-hyun knows how Kim's army thinks. He was one of them until 2019, when he ran across the demilitarized zone to freedom in South Korea.
Honestly, it's not easy to capture North Korean soldier.
Why is it not easy?
Before captured, they suicide themselves. They training like that.
Rui said all recruits learn a song about saving their last bullet for themselves. This is how most of us usually see North Korea's secretive military, marching in parades with ballistic missiles or showing off skills in propaganda videos. Yet interviews with several former North Korean soldiers revealed that one of the largest standing armies lacks much training in modern warfare.
I only fired 3 bullets per year. When I moved to a special force, we do had more than 20 bullets.
So how committed would these North Korean soldiers be to fighting for Russia?
There's no voluntary option whether you go or not. It's a military order.
Lee Chul-yun was a military intelligence officer who swam 6 hours to escape the north. Soldiers, he says, worked mostly at farming and construction. The main enemy was hunger. Grass, potatoes, even tree bark, he says. You ate tree bark? In North Korea, starving is the most common cause of death, he says. For soldiers, deploying to Russia would at least mean better food. In return for troops and weapons, Kim's bargain with Vladimir Putin gives him Russian technical help to advance his weapons program. Kim also gets cash, about $2,000 per soldier, according to South Korean intelligence.
Every penny will be delivered to Kim Jong-un's desk.
U.S. officials are warning that North Korean forces are also gaining combat experience and the prestige that comes with it. It's this sense of honor rather than allegiance to Kim Jong-un that motivates them, says An Chanil, among the first military defectors over 40 years ago. He says this generation of soldiers is more aware of a world beyond North Korea and would look for any way to leave the confines of life there.
Most of people has their own idea, but brainwashing, delete everything, make a white paper, and then they put their thinking.
Ukraine says Russia has provided uniforms and forged military IDs, and that videos show North Koreans trying to outrun attack drones. In the interrogation videos widely shared by Ukraine's military, one of the captives, his jaw bandaged, talked about his family. The other admitted his mother had no idea where he was. President Volodymyr Zelensky has made an offer to Kim Jong-un to swap his soldiers for Ukrainian prisoners in Russia. So far, Kim has yet to even acknowledge his forces' existence there, even as casualties mount and the war grinds on. Janice Mackey-Freyer, NBC News, Seoul.
Janice, thank you. After the break from us, the actor now urging police for some sense and sensibility related to alleged privacy violations by a British tabloid. Why he says this case is not over by a long shot. Stay with us. We're back. Actor Hugh Grant is calling for police in the UK to open a criminal investigation into the owners of a British tabloid widely read, saying that the job of holding them accountable for privacy violations is not over. As we have been reporting, Prince Harry settled a civil case with Rupert Murdoch's newspaper group this week over the allegations that the paper illegally hacked his phone. Hugh Grant settled a similar case last year. Now, the settlements come in part because in the UK, this is important, the UK, the claimant is potentially on the hook for big legal costs, even if the claimant wins the case, because if they refuse the settlement offer, then they might have to pay the payout. Here's what Grant told BBC Radio.
Unless you're prepared to spend, 10, 20 million pounds, you're not going to get findings in court. They're going to game the system to silence you, and that's what they've done consistently over the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's really a strange quirk. NBC's Marissa Parra is joining us now following the story. And Marissa, what Hugh Grant is saying here is that basically the tabloids are having to pay these settlements, but there's no real accountability because they settle, right?
That's exactly what he's saying, Tom. The British actor is using his platform to call for accountability, a new criminal investigation into newsgroup newspapers, into things like 30 million emails deleted as part of what he calls a cover-up. Grant says that that was his initial aim with his own privacy claimed settlement, and Harry's too, that they had hoped that that would be, this investigation would be the natural next step, Tom. Remember, his settlement was months before Harry's own, and he had said that all of this, in his opinion, shows that a civil case is not effective in that arena. Grant says, as you mentioned, as we just heard in that clip from BBC Radio, that appearance was about 5 minutes, that you have to be prepared to spend a lot of money to bring truth to light, in his own words. Quote, they're going to game the system to silence you, even if you do win. Another direct quote from Grant, he said, quote, the people who were giving the orders are still there in positions of great power. We don't think the job is done by any means. So in his words, there's more to come here, Tom. And I will add, we are hearing from the Metropolitan Police telling BBC in request for a statement, quote, we await any correspondence from the parties involved, which we will respond to in due course. So a lot to come here, Tom.
Yeah, it's deep in the British culture. I lived in London for a while. Those tabloids are big business. Marissa Parra, thank you very much. That's a wrap for us this hour. You can see Hallie Jackson on Sunday on NBC Nightly News, and then back here on Monday on NBC News Now. As for us, coverage picks up and resumes right now on News Now. Yeah, no such thing as a slow Friday. A lot of breaking news at the top of the hour here on NBC News Now. We kick it off with President Trump's new threats to change how the U.S. responds to disasters. We expect the president to arrive in California within the hour after slamming FEMA during his visit to hurricane-ravaged North Carolina. So can he really get rid of FEMA? We're breaking all of that down. Also, new tonight, cities on edge. Newark, New Jersey, where we're having video now of an overnight immigration raid, how this fits into the president's deportation plans. Here in Washington, why it's looking like one of the president's most controversial cabinet picks might make it over the finish line. And oh, by the way, some senators are getting threats to vote tonight on peak Hegseth. Plus, another major retail store says it is ending its diversity efforts, why Target says DEI initiatives, not a priority anymore. And the Supreme Court, just in the last hour, agreed to hear a case that could upend the separation of church and state. We're going to dive into that coming up later in the newscast. Good day. I said it was busy, right? I'm in for Hallie. I'm Tom Costello. And at any minute now, we expect to see President Trump on the ground in Los Angeles touring wildfire damage as he vows to completely upend how the federal government responds to the next disaster. The California visit is part of his first trip out of Washington since taking office on Monday, and that's notable given how he has always used California, a blue state, as a foil for his vision of the country, particularly the governor there, Gavin Newsom. They don't get along so well. You'll recall the two have traded barbs over the handling of what will be the most expensive wildfire in the state's history, possibly the country's history. But who will bear that cost? That's the big question, because the president is making this very clear. He puts some of the blame, anyway, on FEMA for what he says is an inadequate response. And that's the federal agency that is responsible for putting the boots on the ground, coordinating from other states, and then distributing money after disasters. But right now, the president, during his visit to North Carolina to tour damage from the hurricane there, Hurricane Hallie, he said he wants to sign an executive order that could essentially get rid of FEMA altogether.
FEMA just hasn't done the job. I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away. and we pay directly. We pay a percentage to the state.
We'll begin the work of fundamentally changing, terminating, or overhauling FEMA. FEMA's been a disaster, no matter where they are.
All right, we have some questions to try to get answered because Mr. Trump says the emergency aid could still come through us. But what does that mean, coming through us? And would that put the burden on states who don't have nearly the same budgets and the manpower as the federal government? NBC's Von Hilliard joins me now. Von, former President Biden promised to reimburse California with federal funds for the cost of damage relief. Is it safe now to say that President Trump will not follow suit? What is FEMA's future as it relates to California?
I think that these next hours, honestly, Tom, will be quite illuminating. Just 8 minutes ago exactly, Air Force One touched down at LAX, and we are told that Governor Newsom of California will be meeting President Trump there on the tarmac. You're looking at live images as you and I speak here. I know I was just before you tossed to me, I was reading a transcript that the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, gave aboard the plane en route from North Carolina to L.A. Here just this afternoon. And there were questions being asked of her about some comments from President Trump earlier today in which he suggested that there would be potentially conditions placed on aid to California, including their implementation of voter ID laws, but also to allow a greater amount of water to flow from Northern California down to Southern California. Of course, there is much at dispute over the specifics and whether additional water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta would have helped in this situation.
Hang on one second. Vaughn, hang on 1 second, only because I want the audience to know we're looking right now at Governor Newsom in what must be a rather awkward moment for him, standing on the tarmac right below Air Force One, waiting for President Trump to come down. President Trump has been targeting and has targeted Newsom for years. And has also said that his incompetence, I'm paraphrasing Trump, is partly to blame for the failed response to the California fires. So this is an awkward meeting, I'm guessing, right? Go ahead, pick it up, Vaughn.
Right. And actually, the press secretary for Donald Trump, the president, was asked about Gavin Newsom being on the tarmac, and she said that this was news to her and the team. So Newsom is doing this on his own accord. He was not invited by President Trump to meet him yet. Clearly, he was not kept from the stairs of where we expect President Trump to step down any moment. You mentioned this, and I think this is a really important part of this conversation. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, as the fires have raged through Southern California, there has been great discord over the policies of whether it be forest management or water management, and the extent to which California officials, mainly Democratic officials, are responsible for the fires being able to ravage such great amounts of land and communities. And this is a debate when it comes to that water flow, I think this is important, that precedes Gavin Newsom's time in office and precedes Donald Trump's time in office. We're talking about back from Obama-Boehner days, debate over water flow coming to Southern California. We're talking about back in 1994, CalFed was created to begin greater coordination between the federal government and the state government. It goes back to Jerry Brown's first time, back in the 70s, being governor of California. But yet, during the first Trump administration, the then President Trump threatened multiple times to cut off aid and funding to California during their battles of wildfires, suggesting that the California officials were not doing enough. And so this will be an interesting conversation that will undoubtedly be taking place moments from now, especially in stark contrast to the state of North Carolina, where President Trump was earlier this afternoon.
You know, Vaughn, you're from Arizona, I'm from Colorado, and water fights go back 100 years, right? And the debate about who gets the water and where it comes from and how much California gets. And I mean, the whole West has been engulfed in this for some time. And you specifically referenced the allegation that Mr. Trump has made, and that is that there's some sort of a valve or a spigot that they didn't turn on up in Northern California that would have fed water downstream to the fire hydrants in the L.A. basin. And the folks in California say there simply isn't that kind of a spigot or a valve.
That's correct. There's, as you noted, we're talking about water policy. There's a lot of intricacies to this here, and there's also an endangered fish species, the smelts, that is also a part of this conversation that has long been debated. But again, we're talking about. There's been debate over the last decades about pipelines of water being constructed from Northern California down to Southern California, and this is one where Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who is from the Bakersfield area, the Central Valley. There's a debate over whether there should be the amount of agriculture in the Central Valley, understanding that it requires a great amount of water, and understanding that Northern California and the Delta there is still very much reliant upon their own water supply. And so this is where that height of criticism is played out, unfortunately, in such a traumatizing and tragic way as this, when there are some officials that are questioned and suggest that the winds were too powerful, that a water supply wouldn't have been enough to stop the tragedy that took place here in the last 2 weeks. But for President Trump, this is notable that this is his first stop during his presidency, inaugurated just 5 days ago, visiting the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, where he was highly critical of FEMA and the resources and the quickness of response. And now here in Southern California, much of this aid and ultimately the future of FEMA is going to come into the hands of the Trump administration. They are now the ones in charge, and it's going to be...
I want to bring in, we have an expert on the ground, one of our correspondents, Morgan Chesky, who has been covering the fires there since the very first hours. And let me tell the audience, you're looking at a shot of Air Force One that is on the tarmac there at LAX. And at the bottom of that stairwell there, the staircase, is the governor of California, who apparently President Trump didn't know was going to show up and stand at the bottom of the stairwell to meet with him or to welcome him, because there is such tension between these two. And now Mr. Trump is not up. Here he comes. He's walking down. I'll tell you what, Morgan, as he's walking down, can you paraphrase exactly where the state is on the acrimony, where the governor is on the acrimony right now with President Trump?
Well, we're about to find out in real time here, Tom, but we did hear from Governor Newsom yesterday when he signed that $2.5 billion relief package, and he said he would meet the president on the tarmac. They're shaking hands in embrace there from those two leaders that have not spoken in some time. There was no invite from President Trump, notably, to the governor to meet him on the tarmac, but Governor Newsom said that they were hoping to put politics aside. You can see they are having an exchange here back and forth. Hoping to put politics aside as the state of California faces this monumental task of rebuilding and recovery here. Notably, Tom, we've heard President Trump mention in the last 48 hours or so that aid to California could be tied to conditional measures such as a voter ID measure, as well as asking the governor to
Morgan, let's listen to the president.
Change his policies. Let's listen in.
Congressman in charge and Michael Watley, and we're going to do a lot of work. We have the Army Corps of Engineers working as they are here, and I think you're going to see some very big progress. They left them high and dry, and now we're going to be taking a little tour with some of the people from the area. I appreciate the governor coming out and meeting me, Kevin, very much, and we'll be talking a little bit. We want to get it fixed. We want to get the problem fixed. And there'll be some ways, but it's like you got hit by a bomb, right?
Yeah.
Like you got hit by a bomb. Would you like to say something?
Most importantly, thank you for being here. It means a great deal to all of us, not just the folks in Palisades, the folks in Altadena that were devastated. We're going to need your support. We're going to need your help. You were there for us during COVID. I don't forget that. And I have all the expectations that we'll be able to work together to get this speedy recovery.
We will. We're going to get it done. Tremendous numbers of lives have been affected. A lot of real estate's been affected. Nobody's ever probably seen anything like this. You can almost say since the Second World War, when you think of it. I mean, nothing like this has happened. And we're going to get it fixed, so we'll get it permanently fixed so it can't happen again. And again, we'll be talking a little bit later, and we'll get it worked out, okay?
I appreciate it, Mr. President.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, both of you have disagreed a lot over the past week over what has happened in this state. How do you plan to
We got to
put your
get it
differences
finished.
aside?
We're looking to get something completed. And the way you get it completed is to work together. He's the governor of the state. And we're going to get it completed. They're going to need a lot of federal help. Unless you don't need any, which should be okay.
We're going to need a lot of federal help.
So we're going to take care of things. Okay?
I have all the confidence in the world we'll work that out.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I guess some of you are coming with us and some of you not. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll see you.
Okay, President Trump there with what we think was an unexpected visit with the governor of California. Let's bring in Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, I'm almost wondering, and you're the guy who covers the White House and you've covered Trump for a long time, was this a power play on the governor's part to essentially put the president on the spot, on national television, on camera, saying we need your help? Because President Trump had even suggested that it was not a done deal.
Right. And there's a reality for Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, that Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. And President Trump, not only as a candidate, but during his first term and in the last days, has repeatedly threatened to seek to cut off aid to California because of their policies and making the case that they have not implemented water policies and forest management policies to prevent the sort of tragedy and high costs associated with that tragedy. And I think that watching the dynamic of those two men right there, I think is staggering because we have seen this with Donald Trump's Republican counterparts who have really cozied up to him and understand the power dynamic of having an open relationship with the now president of the United States. We've seen it with tech executives over the course of the last 2 weeks. We've seen it with other world leaders. And now you're looking at the Democratic governor of California, who President Trump has called Governor Newsom over the course of the last several months and repeatedly criticized. And it was Gavin Newsom that called President Trump, while a candidate, an embarrassment and a man-child. To watch those two men be on that tarmac at LAX at this moment, understanding the hurt that so many people have gone through. This was, I think, an acknowledgement, potentially by both men, that they need to coexist and have a relationship in order to address the tragedy that has happened in the American West here on the backs of thousands of Californians.
Morgan Chesky is on the ground there in Palisades, California, one of the hardest hit, as you know. And Morgan, I'm just wondering, how will the president's comments right there with the governor be received in California, which is just the LA area, which is just devastated?
Yeah, Tom, well, we've been in lockdown here in this Palisades neighborhood in front of the fire station where President Trump is expected to come here within the hour or so. So I haven't had a chance to speak to residents directly impacted as a result of this generational disaster. But politics aside, you have to hope that what we witnessed right there is an encouraging sign for Californians of all political spectrums, because I have to tell you, Tom, you can see it on TV, but when you do get a chance to see the devastation here in person, it changes the gravity of the situation and the nature of this recovery when you realize that this is not something that will take 1 year or two, but multiple years going forward. That is the kind of rebuilding effort, recovery effort we're looking at. I should add that Governor Newsom did sort of telegraph his plan to greet the president there at LAX, I believe yesterday. So the president likely wasn't too surprised there. But there was a lot of question regarding how the two men would greet each other because of their differing political stances. And again, as Vaughn said quite well, you know, this is certainly a sign, a hopeful sign of things to come here as they put politics aside, potentially, and focus on the task at hand here, which is just heartbreaking in every direction you look here, Tom. Really, it is.
Morgan Chesky, thank you very much for your reporting today and throughout the last few weeks. And I know you got a lot of things to get ready for. The news conference, as you see, as we are cutting away and taking the other shot there, that's where the president will be meeting with local officials, and we will hope to carry at least some of that live. We have more breaking news into us right now. At least 2 more ICE encounters taking place in Newark, New Jersey, as the White House appears to be quickly moving now to expel hundreds of migrants from the country. And we have surveillance video obtained by WNBC in New York showing an overnight raid at a fish market in Newark. ICE has launched raids in cities nationwide, according to a Trump administration official. And it comes as senior career Department of Justice chiefs are being reassigned to target sanctuary cities. That, according to a source. Meanwhile, we're just now getting new pictures from the DOD of the inside of the deportation flights, inside now, already taking off to Guatemala. To be clear, these arrests are not necessarily abnormal, right? But they do appear to be ramping up now. The White House says nearly 540 arrests were made on Thursday alone, nearly double the amount of daily arrests made just a couple of months ago in September. We go now to NBC's David Noriega, who's at the southern border as we speak. David, can we talk now about the scene at the border and these deportation flights? Help us make sense now of the actions and what's new versus what's routine.
Yeah, Tom, that's exactly the question that we all need to be asking ourselves, because a couple of things are, in fact, brand new, referring specifically to enforcement on the border. That is, on the one hand, the use of active duty military personnel to physically fly deportees to their country of origin. The use of those military aircraft, those C-17 aircrafts, cargo aircraft, to physically deport people to, in this case, Guatemala, has never happened before. It's interesting, though, Tom, because those C-17 flights actually have less capacity than the charter flights, the big charter flights that ICE Air normally uses for these deportations. Deportation flights to Guatemala specifically happen all the time. It's one of few countries where the U.S. routinely deports people at scale in large numbers, nearly every single day. Nevertheless, the fact that they are using these military aircraft to carry out those deportations is new, and it is notable. The other thing that's new in terms of the use of military personnel for border enforcement is that active duty military personnel are being used to build physical barriers, to help build physical barriers on the border. That is new. Now, there is quite a long precedent for the deployment of active duty military troops, in addition to National Guard to the border, by prior administrations. Even the Biden administration did it, at a pretty significant scale when he lifted Title 42 at the border. But those two specific things, Tom, are new, brand new, in fact.
As far as the raids in other parts of the country, David, I know you're trying to keep your hand on the pulse of everything. There was a lot of confusion over what happened today at a Chicago school.
Yeah, Tom, this reminds me very much of the days after January 20th, 2017, the first time that Trump took office, when there was a sense of panic and, as a result, a good amount of misinformation flying, particularly among immigrant communities and the cities where they live, big cities in America where they live. Now, Trump has been explicit in saying, Trump and people around him, like Tom Homan, for example, have been explicit in saying that there will be immigration enforcement actions in several big cities across the country. Chicago, New York, Denver, Philly, Los Angeles. Not coincidentally, these are cities that have, in one way or another, declared themselves sanctuary cities. Now, there was apparently an incident earlier today where Secret Service personnel were present at a school in Chicago. People from that school said that they believed this was ICE personnel who were present at the school. This would have been significant because ICE just recently lifted its sort of informal but still written prohibition against sending agents to what they called sensitive locations, such as schools and churches. That restriction no longer applies to ICE agents, but in this case, it was not ICE agents at the school. There was a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear specifically in Chicago. There's been some reporting suggesting that there will be enforcement actions there. Such reports were around for the last week, and now there are new reports that they might happen there, in the coming days, as well as in other cities. This sort of cloudy environment of not knowing exactly what's happening and where it's happening, Tom, I think is a part of the sort of keeping people on their toes approach that the Trump administration used the first time it was in office and may be using now. Tom?
All right. David Noriega, thank you very much on the border there. We have some breaking news out of the Supreme Court agreeing to take up a case that could blur the line now between church and state. The justices will hear arguments out of Oklahoma over whether the state can approve the country's first publicly funded religious charter school. NBC's Lawrence Hurley joins me now with more on that. And Lawrence, as we understand it, the lower courts have been pretty clear about where the law in Oklahoma stands. Tell us more about the specific case here and how it has weaved its way through the courts.
Yeah, a key issue here is that the Oklahoma Attorney General, Gentner Drummond, who's a Republican, he took the position against his own party to say he thinks this proposal is blatantly unconstitutional under both Oklahoma law and the U.S. Constitution. So he actually took this case to the Oklahoma Supreme Court, and the court basically agreed with him and said, yes, that the Oklahoma Constitution itself on its own protects or prevents the state from endorsing any kind of sectarian, provide funding to any kind of sectarian issue. So they thought it was a pretty close case. So then the charter board that approved this took the appeal up to the Supreme Court, which, as you know, has a 6-3 conservative majority that's very friendly to conservative religious issues. So that's how this case got up here, and we'll see what happens during the oral arguments that will be coming up this year.
So what will you be watching then? Because as you rightly point out, there's a 6-3 conservative majority rule right now at the Supreme Court. And we have always thought that separation of church and state was kind of a hard and fast line. What is your interpretation of where this goes in the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, this whole issue of the separation of church and state is one that, conservative legal experts and lawyers and people involved in that kind of conservative Christian legal movement have long thought is kind of overstated. And of course, they have this Supreme Court that's friendly to their arguments, and they've actually chipped away at this in several cases that have come up over the last few years. So it's quite possible this case will be another one of those cases going forward.
A lot to watch. Lawrence Hurley, thank you very much. Back here in Washington, we expect a vote tonight on President Trump's choice to lead the world's most expensive and biggest military, maybe not the biggest, actually. His Pentagon pick, Pete Hegseth's nomination, will go before the full Senate, as 2 Republicans are already saying no. The majority's most moderate members, Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. But 2 no votes cannot block this nomination. 4 is the number that you need for that. And with hours to go, it's unclear whether 4 votes will, in fact, go against him. We remind you, Hegseth has faced a barrage of questions about his experience for the job as a former Fox News host, plus allegations of sexual assault and alcohol abuse. Hegseth denies any and all of the allegations. NBC's Julie Sirkin is on Capitol Hill. Julie, an hour ago, you mentioned to us that Senator Collins has received threats about the fact that people don't like that she is, at this point, not going to go forward with voting yes on him. She's voting no.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Some of these threats have been in the public space over the course of several months, telling senators who are up in 2026 that they will have significant primary challengers with significant funding being poured into them by Elon Musk and those like him around President Trump. And that certainly is not changing now that Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins have publicly stated yesterday before the procedural vote that they are no's on Pete Hegseth for a plethora of reasons that have to do with those allegations, that have to do with the fact that they do not believe that he is qualified or has the temperament to be the Secretary of Defense at this time. There is still an open question whether at least 2 Senate Republicans are going to join them in voting against Hegseth tonight. That is what would be needed in order for Hegseth's confirmation here to be stopped. At this point, we still expect in about 3 hours from now, a little bit less than that the vote on the Senate floor on Hegseth's confirmation will take place. There's no indication that that vote is being pulled, that anything is changing, but certainly there are still open questions. For example, Senator Thom Tillis, Senator Mitch McConnell, who's not currently bound by the status he had as being the top Republican in the Senate. They could very well change their votes from yesterday and end up voting against Hegseth tonight. But there is just no indication either way, except for the fact that Tillis, for example, told us that he will be doing his due diligence up until the very end, meaning up until that vote tonight. Next week, though, Tom, you got a lot of other nominees that are perhaps equally as controversial as Hegseth, in Tulsi Gabbard, in RFK Jr., in Kash Patel. You see them there on your screens. They could get bipartisan backlash. They could also get bipartisan support, particularly in RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. But we certainly know that Republicans are uncomfortable, or some are, with those 2 names. At this point, we have not heard any Republicans saying their definitive no's on Kash Patel, but certainly has some questionable statements that he's made in the past that senators will pay very close attention to during his hearing.
To what extent, Julie, is the Hegseth vote tonight kind of a barometer, if you will, of how things may go next week?
Well, certainly it's going to be interesting if they end up crossing President Trump on the Senate floor. And I think it is fascinating if they end up doing that. And now Trump has a list of exactly which senators voted against him. I do not think that those votes would be a total surprise to Trump and his orbit. I have some reporting that at least one of those senators has been communicating their frustrations to the administration, to the transition before Trump was officially in the White House. But then again, that doesn't really matter. You heard Trump say today today that he was surprised about Collins and Murkowski. He threw McConnell's name out there, and he didn't sound too sure if Hegseth would have the votes tonight.
Julie Sirkin, a busy night ahead. Thank you very much. We have more breaking news on this Friday night. Secretary of State Marco Rubio now ordering the U.S. to immediately stop almost all foreign aid and supplies, pending a review. That according to an internal State Department cable obtained by NBC News. Two notable exceptions here, Israel and Egypt. The State Department did not immediately return our request for comment. We want to go now to NBC Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cubie, who's following this. Courtney, what more do we know about why the Secretary of State is out with this order right now? And you mentioned that there's an exception, we believe, for Israel and Egypt. But what about Ukraine?
Yeah, so one thing is very clear in this order, and it is coming directly from the top. This is one of the executive orders that President Trump signed literally in his first hours after being inaugurated this week. And it was this idea that the U.S. would halt, temporarily at least, all foreign aid grants and not grant any new ones for a period of 90 days. Now, this, as I said, it's coming directly from President Donald Trump, but we're learning a little bit more about it today. The way that now Secretary of State Marco Rubio has implemented this to the State Department force around the world is by saying that there would be exceptions for, as you said, specifically military financing. So foreign military sales and financing for Egypt and Israel. And then there's also an exception for humanitarian emergencies. So that means that if you have a location where there is humanitarian aid, emergency disaster aid going to a place, that will continue in some cases. And in addition to that, Tom, the salaries of the people who will be distributing that, working to help with that humanitarian aid, they will also continue to be paid, including local people on the ground in those locations. So we know now that those are the exceptions. But you asked about Ukraine. It's not 100% clear at this point. Right now, as it is written, there is no indication that Ukraine will have any kind of an exception. They could go without this foreign aid for a matter of up to 3 months, Tom.
Can I ask you about the most recent tranche of money that the Biden administration pushed through? The numbers, there are so many numbers out there. It was something like $200 billion in more aid. Will that go through if the money is already in the pipeline, as it were, or are they shutting off the pipeline even if money's in the pipeline?
So it's going to depend on where in that pipeline it is, frankly, which is just to make it all the more confusing. So some of the money has already gone forward, but it's not clear what happens. As it is written right now, everything is literally paused where it is. So if that ends up being implemented literally to the letter, then it's possible that not all that money will end up even going to Ukraine. But again, we're still asking questions, trying to figure out exactly how this will manifest for each of these specific situations, Tom. As of now, I got to say, it looks like it's getting halted.
It's getting halted. All right, Courtney Cubie at the Pentagon. Thank you, Courtney. After the break from us, why Los Angeles prosecutors say they will not file charges against controversial musician Marilyn Manson. And a huge storm slamming Ireland with hurricane-force winds. The widespread impact it's having is coming up next. Still ahead, lawyers for the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students back in court, trying to toss out some DNA evidence, while the judge does not seem convinced. Testimony getting started now in the Los Angeles assault trial of hip-hop superstar A$AP Rocky after his defense lawyer told the jury the case is about jealousy and lies and greed caused by Rocky's former childhood friend. Here's a sample.
The evidence will show you it's nothing more than a money grab, nothing more. A clear intent at extortion by Relly so he can funding this extravagant lifestyle of his.
So you see A$AP, also known as Raheem Mayers, arriving at court as day one of the trial got started. Prosecutors accuse A$AP Rocky of pulling out a gun and shooting at an old friend known as A$AP Relly during an argument back in 2021. You're seeing surveillance video of what prosecutors say is that altercation caught on camera. The 36-year-old rapper is facing 2 felony counts of assault with a semi-automatic weapon. A guilty verdict could land him in prison for up to 24 years. Rocky is pleading not guilty. NBC News analyst Danny Savalos joining me now. Danny, how strong of a case is each side presenting here today, and what do you make of what we've heard so far on day one?
Well, the trouble with firearm possession cases, and especially use of firearm during the commission of a crime or even discharging a firearm, is that they're relatively easy to prove. You call a witness, that's the guy, he pulled out a gun, he pulled the trigger, and bullets came out of the gun. That alone will get you a conviction in most states, especially states that penalize discharging a firearm unlawfully. So that makes it a relatively strong case. But of course, in the chaos of that melee that you saw in that video, A$AP Rocky has some daylight because he might be able to argue that he may have been the victim, that the other guy was the aggressor. And in that chaos, he may be able to show that the government may not be able to show so easily that he did possess a gun and that he did pull the trigger.
So Rocky and his team opted to turn down an appeal of a plea deal of 180 days in jail, and then take the risk of going to trial where he could actually face real prison time, right? Is that a big gamble, given the circumstances in this case?
It is the biggest gamble of gambles. Forget Atlantic City, forget Las Vegas. I'm telling you, as a criminal defense attorney, it takes nerves of steel to turn down a plea offer, any plea offer. And that's why the vast majority of cases end in plea deals, because let's just face it, most of us don't have the stomach to go through a criminal trial. Most of us don't have the stomach for that kind of risk. The 180 days is a known quantity, whereas you could end up 24-year maximum. But if you feel good about your case and you feel strong and you feel confident in your attorneys, then you go forward and go to trial. But few among us have that kind of chutzpah.
Or the money to be able to do this, I'm guessing, right? I mean, it's his attorneys, they're not cheap.
Actually, you know, I got to tell you, a lot of times with public defenders, those are the folks that end up going to trial a lot because their clients are like, what the heck? It's free. Why not? I don't care. Let's go to trial. I'm not paying for it.
Yeah. Danny Savalos, thank you very much. Let's get you over now to the 5 things or teen things that you should know about this evening. Number 1, the teenager who shot and killed a student at a school in Tennessee earlier this week actually live streamed part of the incident. That according to the platform he used. Authorities say he was influenced by content described as harmful and objectionable. You'll recall the 17-year-old gunman also hurt a second student before the gunman himself died by suicide. Number 2, the defense team for murder suspect Bryan Kohberger is trying to get evidence tossed out. You recall he's accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students back in 2022. His defense is now challenging how investigators collected DNA and then used a public ancestry site. The judge, though, seemed to be unpersuaded that the techniques actually violated Kohberger's rights. Number 3, Los Angeles prosecutors say they are not going to file charges against singer Marilyn Manson after a years-long investigation. The DA says allegations of domestic violence are outside the statute of limitations and that they cannot prove charges of sexual assault beyond a reasonable doubt. Manson did not immediately respond to our request for comment on this. Number 4, Target announcing it is rolling back diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In a memo to employees, it says it will end its 3-year DEI goals, stop reports to external diversity-focused groups, and end a program focused on carrying more products from Black or minority-owned businesses. The decision comes after President Donald Trump's executive orders, almost immediately after he took office, to end the government's DEI programs. Number 5, Billie Eilish, Shakira, and Sabrina Carpenter, all some of the folks set to perform at this year's Grammy Awards. They're all also nominated for the show on February 2nd, hosted by Trevor Noah. The Recording Academy says more performers will be announced in the coming days. Stay tuned. Still ahead from us, what sparked a scary fire at an oil processing plant in Iraq. Plus, what we know about the thousands of fish turning up dead on Chile's shoreline. That's coming up after our break. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day. It's almost impossible to read, watch, or listen to everything, so our teams have done it for you and for me, and here's a look at what they're watching. We call this the Global. From Iraq, take a look at this. A fire erupting from an oil processing plant today. The country's oil ministry says it started inside a storage tank. No one was seriously injured. The fire is now under control. The cause still under investigation. Out of Chile, thousands of dead fish washed up alongside the shoreline in the country's north. Crews are cleaning it up over potential health concerns. The Chilean National Service of Fisheries and Agriculture is warning people not to touch or eat the fish. No word yet on what might have killed them. In Ireland, a big storm bringing record winds. Take a look. You can even see a weather company worker struggling to just put up a wind speed data monitor in place. And in Dublin, an ice skating rink got destroyed. Hundreds of flights are canceled and schools are closed. Almost a third of the country lost power, and the power company says it could take days to restore it for customers, and the winds are headed towards the UK. Tonight, people in Belarus are getting ready for a big election on Sunday. Some are even voting early, but will their vote count? A lot of experts are already calling this a sham election, saying, I'm quoting here, that Europe's longest dictator is about to get another term, and he didn't earn it. NBC's Yasmin Basugian explains in tonight's breakdown.
Right now, early voting is happening in Belarus, where a crucial election will happen this weekend. The country, the European Parliament says, is now run by, quote, Europe's last dictator. We're talking about President Alexander Lukashenko. He's seeking his 7th term in office, expected to win again in a vote that many Western democracies are already calling illegitimate. Lukashenko says that the more he is stirred by these accusations, the more inclined he is to run and do what's necessary for Belarus. Lukashenko even moving the election up from the summer to now. Some political analysts saying this move is because cold weather will discourage mass protests and dissent of his election. How the world reacts to Sunday's election could set a new tone, especially with the new Trump administration as they look to end the war in Ukraine because of Belarus's close ties to Russia and Russian President Vladimir Putin. From the outside, Lukashenko's grip on power seems steady, but the streets tell a different story. The last election in 2020, massive protests and a violent response from the government. But it wasn't always like this. Lukashenko, first elected in 1994, 3 years after the Soviet Union collapsed. Then, his election, a symbol of a new era, despite maintaining close ties with Russia and Putin once he took power.
Russia and Belarus signed a treaty back in the late 90s that stipulated the creation of what they call the Union State. They're equal on paper.
Lukashenko, for his part, cracking down on journalists and censoring non-state-owned media and political opposition. In 2004, a referendum was passed to remove term limits, clearing the path for him to stay in power. A congressional report now estimating a few 100,000 people have fled the country since 2020, including the opposition leader from the 2020 election.
Belarusian people haven't given up in our fight for freedom, and despite all the repressions that are continuing for years already, people continue to fight.
Now the new face of the opposition movement behind bars, along with over 1,000 political prisoners, according to a U.S. congressional report. But in an unexpected move in the past couple of months, Lukashenko pardoned over 100 prisoners.
He's creating himself a maneuver space to be able to have some rapprochement with the West.
Lukashenko possibly looking for support from President Trump amidst the administration's approach on Ukraine and Lukashenko's ongoing support for Moscow. We've reached out to the White House for comment, but have not yet heard back. And this weekend's election critical to the country's future.
Yasmin actually joins us right now. And Yasmin, this may be impossible to know. How is Belarus feeling about the new president, the new Trump administration?
Well, I mean, I think, you kind of heard it there in the piece, Tom, whereas Lukashenko is essentially cracking down on journalists, on dissidents, on opposition as well. So many Belarusians feel as if they're living in a police state, not unlike folks that are living right now inside Russia as well. Of course, Belarus's main ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin, they were hoping, of course, between the war in Ukraine, that there was a possibility that with Western help, Ukraine could topple Russia, meaning topple Putin, and then subsequently topple Lukashenko. Instead now, with the dawn of the Trump administration looking to strike a deal and end the war, they're seeing likely Putin's power grow, which means, of course, Lukashenko's power will grow as well. And I just want to remind folks, as we saw images there as well, back in 2020, he declared winning that presidential election with 80% of the vote. The people inside Belarus, they said no way. They flooded the streets. The European Union as well, not accepting those results. And so certainly he is likely to win this weekend, but a lot of Belarusians inside that country not happy about it, Tom.
And it may be one reason why he hasn't put troops in Ukraine, right? I mean, he's afraid of backlash from his own military and his own people.
Right, exactly right.
Yeah. Yasmin, thanks very much. Coming up from us, a rare glimpse into how North Korea's military thinks, what former troops of Kim Jong-un's army told our team in Korea. That's coming up after the break. We're back with our original now in-depth reporting on a topic we like to watch. South Korea's military today says it suspects North Korea is getting ready to send even more troops to Russia to fight Ukrainian forces after North Korean soldiers have already suffered heavy casualties in the fighting, in part because they lack modern combat training. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer spoke with former members of Kim Jong-un's army who have since defected to South Korea.
When 2 North Korean soldiers were captured alive, it was a victory of sorts for Ukraine. Videos released by Ukraine's military have shown the men being questioned with help from South Korean intelligence. One of them said he thought he was going for training, not a war, and that initially he didn't know who he was fighting. The North Koreans are providing a rare glimpse into Russian forces in Kursk, where U.S. officials say some 12,000 North Korean troops are taking heavy losses. But for Ukraine, the prisoners are also crucial evidence that could expose Kim Jong-un's role in an expanding war. Ri Sung-hyun knows how Kim's army thinks. He was one of them until 2019, when he ran across the demilitarized zone to freedom in South Korea.
Honestly, it's not easy to capture North Korean soldier.
Why is it not easy?
Before captured, they suicide themselves. They training like that.
Rui said all recruits learn a song about saving their last bullet for themselves. This is how most of us usually see North Korea's secretive military, marching in parades with ballistic missiles or showing off skills in propaganda videos. Yet interviews with several former North Korean soldiers revealed that one of the largest standing armies lacks much training in modern warfare.
I only fired 3 bullets per year. When I moved to a special force, we do had more than 20 bullets.
So how committed would these North Korean soldiers be to fighting for Russia?
There's no voluntary option whether you go or not. It's a military order.
Lee Chul-yun was a military intelligence officer who swam 6 hours to escape the north. Soldiers, he says, worked mostly at farming and construction. The main enemy was hunger. Grass, potatoes, even tree bark, he says. You ate tree bark? In North Korea, starving is the most common cause of death, he says. For soldiers, deploying to Russia would at least mean better food. In return for troops and weapons, Kim's bargain with Vladimir Putin gives him Russian technical help to advance his weapons program. Kim also gets cash, about $2,000 per soldier, according to South Korean intelligence.
Every penny will be delivered to Kim Jong-un's desk.
U.S. officials are warning that North Korean forces are also gaining combat experience and the prestige that comes with it. It's this sense of honor rather than allegiance to Kim Jong-un that motivates them, says An Chanil, among the first military defectors over 40 years ago. He says this generation of soldiers is more aware of a world beyond North Korea and would look for any way to leave the confines of life there.
Most of people has their own idea, but brainwashing, delete everything, make a white paper, and then they put their thinking.
Ukraine says Russia has provided uniforms and forged military IDs, and that videos show North Koreans trying to outrun attack drones. In the interrogation videos widely shared by Ukraine's military, one of the captives, his jaw bandaged, talked about his family. The other admitted his mother had no idea where he was. President Volodymyr Zelensky has made an offer to Kim Jong-un to swap his soldiers for Ukrainian prisoners in Russia. So far, Kim has yet to even acknowledge his force's existence there, even as casualties mount and the war grinds on. Janice Mackey-Frayer, NBC News, Seoul.
Janice, thank you. After the break from us, the actor now urging police for some sense and sensibility related to alleged privacy violations by a British tabloid. Why he says this case is not over by a long shot. Stay with us. We're back. Actor Hugh Grant is calling for police in the UK to open a criminal investigation into the owners of a British tabloid widely read, saying that the job of holding them accountable for privacy violations is not over. As we have been reporting, Prince Harry settled a civil case with Rupert Murdoch's newspaper group this week over the allegations that the paper illegally hacked his phone. Hugh Grant settled a similar case last year. Now, the settlements come in part because in the UK, this is important, the UK, the claimant is potentially on the hook for big legal costs, even if the claimant wins the case, because if they refuse the settlement offer, then they might have to pay the payout. Here's what Grant told BBC Radio.
Unless you're prepared to spend, 10, 20 million pounds, you're not going to get findings in court. They're going to game the system to silence you, and that's what they've done consistently over the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's really a strange quirk. NBC's Marissa Parra is joining us now following the story. And Marissa, what Hugh Grant is saying here is that basically the tabloids are having to pay these settlements, but there's no real accountability because they settle, right?
That's exactly what he's saying, Tom. The British actor is using his platform to call for accountability, a new criminal investigation into newsgroup newspapers, into things like 30 million emails deleted as part of what he calls a cover-up. Grant says that was his initial aim with his own privacy claim settlement, and Harry's too, that they had hoped that would be, this investigation would be the natural next step, Tom. Remember, his settlement was months before Harry's own, and he had said that all of this, in his opinion, shows that a civil case is not effective in that arena. Grant says, as you mentioned, as we just heard in that clip from BBC Radio, that appearance was about 5 minutes, that you have to be prepared to spend a lot of money to bring truth to light, in his own words. Quote, they're going to game the system to silence you, even if you do win. Another direct quote from Grant, he said, quote, the people who were giving the orders are still there in positions of great power. We don't think the job is done by any means. So in his words, there's more to come here, Tom. And I will add, we are hearing from the Metropolitan Police telling BBC in request for a statement, quote, we await any correspondence from the parties involved, which we will respond to in due course. So a lot to come here, Tom.
Yeah, it's deep in the British culture. I lived in London for a while. Those tabloids are big business. Marissa Parra, thank you very much. That's a wrap for us this hour. You can see Hallie Jackson on Sunday on NBC Nightly News, and then back here on Monday on NBC News Now. As for us, coverage picks up and resumes right now on News Now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.